So one frosty morning in March of this year, I walked by a Zimmermann store and I saw this dress in the window. Immediately, I was obsessed with it. I love the hydrangea print. I love the buttons. I love the sleeves. I love everything about it. So I immediately went onto their website to look it up. And I saw it was $1,000 American. So this was just, completely outside my budget. There's no way I was buying this dress. But it was perfect opportunity to make my own. So that was from March. Now if you go on the website in December, they do have the same dress just in different fabrics with a slightly different belt. So it's pretty similar. It's 100% linen and it has really nice rouleau button detailing and a scarf belt now. And then, as if meant to be, Dressmaking Amóre released the Melody dress pattern in the end of March. This was, as quoted by them, a Zimmermann inspired button dress, so I knew I wanted to make this. And I already had the fabric in mind. I've been wanting to sew with Nani fabric since I started sewing, like the very first year I sewed. And on kokkafabrics.com, this one was on sale. I got the first one on the left there. All but the first and the third were sold out at that time. But honestly, I love all of them. I really like the one on the right side, that dark navy. It's so gorgeous. But the paler backgrounds are a little more Zimmermann. So that's what I went with. My birthday is in April, so the timing was just perfect for this to be a birthday gift. As soon as it arrived in the mail, I unwrapped it and I was so excited. To wash this fabric, I decided to hand wash it in the bathtub with some gentle detergent. I washed both the lining fabric and the main fabric. As you can see, you let it soak in lukewarm water for about 15 minutes and then you can let it dry. It dries pretty fast also because it's very thin. So obviously, given that this fabric is very expensive, I had to make a muslin. So I just took a lot of the scraps from the pearl dress that I just did a video on, and I pieced together enough fabric to make a copy of the bodice. And I originally was gonna have this be a wearable muslin, so I put both sleeves on it, and yeah, I was gonna make this wearable. Spoiler alert, it did not end up wearable. So here is my try on video. It was like way too small for me. I was so confused because I've made Dressmaking Amóre patterns before, so I was very confused. It ended up being because of the way I sewed the dart, so there will be more on that later. But basically, it's kind of an interesting dart. It's not your traditional dart, so just watch out for that if you're making the pattern. Follow the instructions. Yeah. So I think I did a full bust adjustment. I added a bit of space in the bust so I could actually close it, and I just kind of crossed my fingers and hoped that everything else would work out, which is not advisable, but I did that. And so I bravely started the work on the main garment. This is the lining fabric. It's the silky cotton poplin from Core Fabrics because I knew this fabric would be a little bit transparent. So I decided to, I don't know if I knew at this point if I was going to do an underlining or a real lining, but I ended up doing an underlining because the way the instructions were, it just made more sense for me. I didn't feel like drafting a piece to attach to the facing. I just wanted to keep the facing as is. So here I am just straightening out the fabric and then laying out the pieces. As you can see, it gets cut off there a bit, so I just narrowed that skirt panel, which I've done before, and it works fine. Now here's the gorgeous Nani silk. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Please correct me down below if you know. Cotton silk is a really interesting fabric. It's very thin and often sheer, and it has a sheen to it. So here I am pinning all my pieces on it and cutting them out, and because of the width of this fabric, I did have to cut a lot of pieces, specifically the sleeves, on the single layer, so I had to cut them out twice. And cotton silk, at least this specific cotton silk, is so nice to cut. It's so thin and crisp when you cut it. It's It's really nice. On the skirt pieces I cut, there was one side where there wasn't much of the pattern, if you can see that. I didn't manage to place it well, so we'll see how that looks in the final garment. On these bodice pieces, you can see my mistake I made with the dart. I did not cut out the triangle of the dart. You are supposed to, but when I was adding fabric for the full bust adjustment, I forgot that it was a cut out dart. And instead of just folding the dart in like you normally do and sewing the legs, you have to put the cut edges together and sew them with a seam allowance. So I completely did it the wrong way, as you'll see, and then I had to unpick it and redo it. But it was salvageable and it made it fit way better. So I spent all the time like marking out the dart with thread, which I do recommend doing for normal darts, but obviously you don't need to do that here. At this point, I realized it didn't fit at all and something was very wrong, and I realized the mistake and I unpicked it, cut out the triangle, and then repinned it like this, and it was big difference. So if you do this on your muslin, that's a better idea than what I did. I don't have a serger, so I like to use this faux serging stitch on the Husqvarna. It's not really the same, but you know, it functions pretty well. Definitely, I prefer it over a zigzag. I should also mention the back of this dress is going to just be plain lining fabric because I didn't have enough of the printed to go over the back. And you know, if any place of the dress has to have no print on it, the back bodice does make the most sense. Now onto the straps. The straps are quite long in this project, but I have a really good way of how to do them. So you just stitch in, I think I stitched really basically the middle of the strap, like they say in the instructions. And then you trim it, and you've just got to be careful. And then this is the bobby pin trick. So cut a little snip close to one of the ends with some scissors. Keep it really small. And then stick a bobby pin so that the hooked end grabs onto that little snip that you did. And then you can start pulling it through. Bobby pins are really slippery, so they're nice for going through fabric like this. They're also not sharp and they're easy to feel under the fabric. This is my favorite way to do it, and it's quite fast. Then we press, of course. So you cut some loops, and according to the notches, you put them onto the bodice like this. It's very satisfying. And you sandwich them together as you stitch them, and also sew the shoulders while you're at it. And now you get to admire your work. I think this is a cute feature of this dress, definitely following that trend of like lace up corset backs. Remember to do this step of stitching the loops over to one side on the seam allowance. And then you can move on to the pockets. So you want to start by interfacing those kind of sticky out portions of the skirt, and then you put them together. And I used French seams, of course. I always love doing French seams. I don't know, it's just so beautiful, and I find it kind of therapeutic. This dress does have pockets, so I'm just putting the pocket bag onto the skirt and attaching it there. Next, you sew the outline of the side seams and go around the pockets, and then zigzag or use a serger around the edges. Here I do zigzag just because it is a bit quicker. You can see right now that the pocket is kind of visible under the skirt, but once there's a white lining under there, the pocket will blend in and will be invisible. Then you're supposed to do bar tacks, and this is me just showing a slight mistake I did where I accidentally caught some of the dress in it, and so I unpicked it, and unfortunately there were a little bit of tiny holes there, but they do kind of heal as you iron the fabric. Just be careful when you do this step. This is what a nice bar tack should look like. Okay, so now onto the lining. I'm cutting off those little sticky out parts because the pockets are already attached. So this underlining is going to be, it's not really an underline, it's just a lining for the skirt, because I have the two separate skirts here. And then I'm going to gather each one of them separately because they're slightly different widths. Remember how I made one of those ones more narrow? This is where that kind of becomes important to remember. I matched up the seams, I basted it first, and then I sewed it for real, because you really want to make sure all the gathers are looking well and everything is lying where you want it to be. And then here I tried it on, and this is kind of the result of not doing a proper muslin, like having the mistake with the darts. It was a little too small. As you can see, it felt really, like I could barely close it. So I decided to take out the side seam. So I'm getting about a little more than 1/4 of an inch on each side. So about 1/2 an inch bigger. And as you can see here, it just has some breathing room. It looks a lot more comfortable, and it was a lot more comfortable. It is still a little bit on the snug side, but you know, I think it looks good. I kind of wish the waist seam was 1/2 an inch lower. I decided to make this dress without without lengthening the bodice at all, because on a couple videos ago, my Noel dress, I felt like the waist was too low on that, so I just decided to see how the normal drafted waist hits on me, just about 1/2 an inch off. Next up is sewing the facing. So I don't know if anyone else has this problem, like the points didn't really line up. It ended up not really mattering. And then I put this bias binding on this edge of the facing, because I just think that's a really nice way to finish a facing, and it's worth extra time that you put into it. Then you attach the facing to the dress, and this is such a nice step because all of the pieces are coming together, and you can finally like truly try it on after this step. And then I understitched there, and then I think I cut this little piece of interfacing, so I'm grading the seam to reduce bulk. And yay, it's starting to look like a real dress. I tried it on one more time just to double check the fit, and I was quite happy with it. I did feel pretty cupcakey in this dress though. Now I'm on to the sleeves, so starting out with a French seam, and then it's time to gather both the top and the bottom of the sleeve, so lots of gathering. The bottom wide portion gets inserted to this little binding that you make, made out of like a rectangle of self fabric. It's quite heavily gathered in order to fit into that really small binding, so just a word of warning, I guess. You will be pulling those little tails for a while. And then try to put the presser foot inside of the little circle there. It makes it a lot easier to sew. And then you fold the binding in half, and then fold it in half again to cover that seam allowance. I love that. You top stitch. Try to top stitch as close as you can to the edge, because here you can see it looks a little sloppy and the gathering stitches may show. So really try, look how much better it looks. Really try to get it close to the edge. I did French seams for my sleeves, for my armhole sleeves. And then here's the obligatory intersecting armpit seam clip. And here it is with the sleeves in. So you might think, oh, wow, you're almost done. But these last few steps were honestly such a big headache for me that it took quite a long time to finish. It was a little confusing because since I kind of underlined the skirt, but it was not attached, I had to figure out how I was going to hem both of them since there is a facing. And a facing you have to sew kind of like a shirt, you know, you can't just turn up and sew, you have to deal with the facing. So I shortened the lining a little bit so it wouldn't peek out from under the main fabric. I just cut off a uniform amount, and then I hemmed it by itself, just with a narrow hem. I just turned it up with like the iron, and then I hemmed the main fabric and made sure that it was longer than the lining. So there's the effect you get. You get two different hems, and then I still had to deal with this facing, so I flipped it right sides together, and then sewed across that line so that it would be even with the main fabric. Of course, make sure both sides are even. This is really important. Yeah, it's like one of these final steps that's it makes a big difference. And then you trim it and turn it right side out. And so you get this nice corner on the bottom that's clean, and then the hem starts. Because the pattern is for an unlined dress, I had to figure this out on my own, so that's what gave me a headache. And I hope that if you're making a dress in a fabric that's a bit more sheer, this will give you some ideas on how to handle it. Finally, it's time for the buttons. This is all the fabric I had left, so not much at all. And I used covered buttons because this is such an iconic and important design feature of the Zimmermann dress. So I got these two, and then I realized that the tulle wasn't included after I'd already bought them. So I had to buy this one. This one was from the States and the other ones were from Canada. They're the same size, but you'll see when I take them out, they're slightly different. And that one had the tulle in it. And on the back, you'll see it has like the size of the circle of fabric that you need. So you want to make sure you don't completely tear apart the backing when you open it. This is the difference in sizes. The Canadian ones were a little bit bigger, which was annoying, but you know, it didn't actually make that much of a difference. So then I liked to trace out the stencils of the circles and just put a ton of fabric layers together so I wouldn't have to cut out a million. This was my first time doing it, and this was button number 1, and as you can see, it doesn't really look good. I got a bit discouraged, but after watching a few videos, I figured out how to do it. So since my fabric's sheer, I need to use the lining. So the order of what I do is I put the main fabric down, right side facing down. Then I put the lining, doesn't really matter which side. And then I put that portion of the button. I press this down into the little silicone cup. I used this. I guess you could use that little blue tool it comes with. That would probably be smart. But you just need to make it go in there. And you want to avoid using a pen because you might actually like make a little dent in it. I used a pen for like just getting it to completely go down, but you don't want to put too much pressure with a pen. Okay, so it's all the way in the cup there, you can see. And then you trim the excess fabric, just basically where it's overflowing from the cup. You put the backing on and cover all the raw edges of the fabric. Put the blue tool down, and this is a technique that helped me get an even distribution of force, as I put like a little ruler down before I pressed on it. It helped me apply more force and have it more evenly distributed. Shout out to Patrick for giving me that idea. And then you pop it out of the little silicone thing. And look how much better this looks. I was so proud of myself for being able to do this. I think this is like 14, or you can count on the screen if you want. It was a lot of buttons. There was one that was kind of a fail, but luckily I had an extra, so it was okay. I didn't even end up using all the ones I made. There's still more work to do. So I tried on the dress to decide the button placement. You want to do one at the kind of like apex or the widest point of your bust, because that would be where it would gape, you know, especially since this is like close fitting dress. You want to put the button there, and you want to put one at the waist as well. And then after that, you just want to space them out pretty evenly throughout. So I laid it flat, and I kind of just put the buttons on there to see how many I wanted to put on and what looked good. So what I decided on was 2 inches between each button, and starting the first one 3 inches from the bottom. Before putting the buttonholes on, I did some test buttonholes, and I went with the biggest one. But test on the actual fabric you're going to use, because even though I tested, mine ended up being too small, and you'll hear more of that later. So I used the automatic buttonhole foot that comes with the Husqvarna. It works well, but the sizes is where sometimes it's not super consistent. And I cut them open. Now, I always do my buttonholes with the seam ripper, and I'm very careful, and I do like one side from the edge to the middle to the edge to the middle. But this time I did slice open one of my buttonholes. So I'd use a small zigzag and kind of redo the sides of them. Also, since some of them were too short, I had to redo the edges of them. So very annoying because there's so many, and like a lot of them were too small. So I basically had to redo most of the buttonholes. It really sucked. There you can get a close-up of what happened with my seam ripper. I'm buying the buttonhole chisel. I'm never doing seam ripper opening buttonholes again. I'm converted. I get it now. I get why it's a danger. Lesson learned. Okay, I was able to salvage it, so not too bad, but too risky. Now I get to just peacefully sew on my buttons after all that drama, and I do it watching TV. It's a nice moment. You get to make sure they line up well, and you just stick a pin through and make sure they're in the right spot. And there, look at how gorgeous that looks. As much as the covered buttons did add a lot of time, I think it's totally worth it because it gives such a professional finish, like something you would buy in a store. Finish off with some fray check, especially after all these buttonholes went through. Now the cost breakdown of this dress is quite expensive, although it still is less expensive than the $1,100 Zimmermann dress. That doesn't even have silk in it. So I spent about $117 on the main fabric, and that was with a sale. And actually that was a birthday gift, so we don't even need to count it, but I will. The pattern was also a birthday gift. Decided to get this pattern printed at a PDF printing service at Encore Fabrics, and so that added about $15. The buttons are also another expense. They're more expensive than like a zipper or normal buttons, so just keep that in mind. So overall it's an expensive dress, but it's cotton silk and it's really gorgeous print. I'm really happy with it, so I think a dress like this is worth it. So finally, the reveal. Here's the dress. I think it turned out really beautifully. I paired it with my green roots bag because I think the green just brings out the green in the print so well. I love the sleeves. I love the buttons. Those are my two favorite features. And I think the neckline is really gorgeous, really flattering. It's also just refreshing to sew a dress that doesn't have a zipper. This dress has that cute tie back detailing, which is beautiful and allows for a bit more custom fit. I lengthened the sleeves. I don't think I mentioned it. I lengthened the sleeves 1 inch, by the way, and I'm 5'11". That's it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you are planning on making this dress and what your fabric is. I'm so interested because this is such a versatile pattern, like I said. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.